This is a very frustrating circuit because although it's so smooth, it has so many good qualities, it's missing one quality, and that is there's no current to speak of. It's a totally voltage-oriented circuit. Now, I don't get matrix's singular error. It's a very smooth operation. I do have to run it for a considerable amount of time. 1300 seconds, which you can figure out for yourself how long that is. There's no conventional source. In other words, I don't even have to put pre-charge on any of these capacitors. All I have to do is give it this ground at this location, and away it goes. Where did the voltage go? Darn it. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, I gotta get the... There it is. Okay. So, now what I'm contending here is that this is one of three circuits that are duplicates of each other, and each one takes care of each of the three phases of a three-phase AC motor. And the minimum visible so-called radio tubes are 4 per each of these three circuits, 2 on the left, 2 on the right, with a spark gap in the middle between them, a neon bulb basically, style spark gap. And then each of these three circuits has a transformer of 100 henries on either side of its 2 coils. And one of these 2 coils links these 2 electrical equivalent of a copper sphere with each other. The other coil has some components. It's got a 1 Henry coil. Could just as easily be a 1 ohm resistor, because that's how much resistance is on that 1 Henry coil. And then it has a 1 farad capacitor. It almost doesn't matter, in a sense, just so long as that capacitor is there. But it doesn't matter whether it's an inductor or a resistor. I think the inductor gives more voltage accumulation, so I go with the inductor. And this capacitor is elevated over the other 4. And now these capacitors, you don't see them because they're on the other side of the coils. If this is a motor, fine, whatever, but it's not something you would see. All he sees are what goes in the project box, which is this portion here and this portion here. He doesn't see anything else. So here's the wire. Now the spark gaps you can make your own. I don't know, maybe he had them in his pocket, who knows. But you don't need vacuum tubes for that. Yeah, you could just use 2 needles brought close together. I don't know how it would work with air or a vacuum. Well, no, not, yeah, it would have to be a no, it would have to be air, actually. Yeah, I don't know how that would differ. But I don't think it matters, because the properties of a spark gap are the same, whether it's a neon bulb or whatever. More or less. And that's how this circuit is working. There's nothing fantastic going on here. Let's see, what else? What else? I mean, there's nothing much to say. I wish I could get some current out of this, but the problem is the voltage is so evenly, well, first of all, it's evenly distributed in a sense, in a very symmetrical sense. It keeps repeating itself. So there's not a whole lot of deviation to work with. But even with the deviation, for instance, there's a tremendous amount of voltage difference across each of the 4 vacuum tube capacitors, and that's the maximum voltage difference throughout the circuit. 7 megavolts on each of these 4 vacuum tube capacitors. Now there's only about 2 megavolts across this capacitor here that's adjacent to grounding. But, oh my, you know. But the current is like nanoamps. It's ridiculously small. It's just not draining. It doesn't want to. It just wants to hold on to its voltage. It's very good. And, you know, I'm not giving it anything explicitly. I'm just giving it a ground. And it gets all the voltage it wants and holds on to it jealously. Now, I mean, oh, I don't get it. How do you get current out of something that doesn't want to give it up? What it means is it doesn't have a whole lot of current to give up. It's very easy to kill this thing, to kill the voltage accumulation, and I think that's the problem. For some reason, it doesn't have. You know what I think it is because it has so few components in each of these analogies to a copper sphere, a hollow copper sphere, these two analogies. Because I minimized everything. I minimized the number of coils to 2, capacitors to 2, spark gap is still 1 because you only need 1 minimally. So how would have Tesla done it? I don't know. I have no idea. See, normally you have to break everything up, segment everything into multiple capacitors that are in parallel in a radial fashion around the central hub, which is the spark gap, which then all those divisions gives you an opportunity to put in more coils tangentially around the circumference of this so-called electronic sphere, hollow sphere. But I don't get to do that. And I think that's why it lacks current. Okay, so this device does not give us current, it just gives us voltage. Fine. What do you do with it, though, to make current if all you see is a project box that develops voltage? I mean, I can't figure out how to do anything here to get current, either here or anywhere else. I can't change the ratio proportion between the two coils of the transformer to get some kind of current. No. It just changes the behavior of the voltage accumulation. So what do you have to do? You have to put in a diode. It killed it. So it shows there's very little current available to be killed, to be loaded, shall we say. Because that's what kill means, is to load. So it has no current to offer. Yeah, duh. Okay, but it has a lot of voltage. So it's a very vulnerable, it's a very tenuous status of high voltage. You probably couldn't kill somebody with this circuit because it has so little current. So how do you run a motor? Is it an AC motor after all? What if Tesla came up with an electrostatic motor? All it needed was voltage. Well, that would solve everything. Yeah, but nobody's been able to do that, a high-power electrostatic motor. All the high-power motors are electromagnetic in orientation. And that's why you can get fried if you touch something, because there's so much current involved. I don't know. That's a very good question to ask, because then it would obviate the need to put current into these things, because they're obviously very good at being a solid-state electrostatic generator, basically. Yeah, instead of a whirligig Van de Graaff machine, Tesla came up with a solid-state version. Okay, fine. So if the Amman brothers managed to do something similar, and I'm imagining they did, just not as efficient, because they used actual copper spheres instead of the electrical analog to a copper sphere, still, how do you convert? They said there was a mineral inside that drum. There was wire and iron. Might have been the drum was iron and the wire was copper. What mineral would give you current would become a current source if all you had to give it was voltage that had no amp hours of current to back up that voltage? So it could become very easy to collapse that voltage if we drained it of any current to speak of, rather than like a leakage current, a very tiny leakage current maybe we could get away with, but that's it. So what mineral would do this? And is this the secret behind the Moray device is that secret mineral. Presumably, he discovered it in the Swiss Alps somewhere, or whatever, and he incorporated it into his device. That might be the piece of information that's missing, because I've got everything else working so efficiently. I've got a minimum number of parts. I can get any amount of voltage buildup I want to. It takes a little while. It's a little slow, but I've seen ridiculous amounts. In fact, I've tuned this to be down to where it's at currently, which is 2 megavolts, generally speaking, until you get to, on either side of the spark gap, it's 9 megavolts over there, and it's 9 there. So it's 9 on the two terminals of each spark gap is 9 megavolts, and then everywhere else it's about 2 megavolts. So, I could have tuned this to be anything I wanted it to be, ridiculously higher, but it's still no current to speak of. So that's going to have to be my next step of investigation of what mineral and how would you use it to create a current. So what I normally do is I put out information, even though I feel like a fool for not having all the answers. Because you know what? It creates karma. And the karma comes back to me. It's the only wealth I have, is the ability to to stimulate the flow of knowledge, as if that's the only current that I possess. So I put out the knowledge, I get more knowledge, comes back to me in the form of inspiration. So even though nobody talks to me, right? I'm talking to myself when I post to most places. I get some comments, but not a whole lot of dialogue to speak of, because nobody's prepared for this sort of stuff. But I do get a dialogue. It's coming from somewhere. I'll tell you what Charlie Lutz would say. He'd say, go into the garden, go into your garden, anybody's garden, go into the garden and relax. And let the devatas speak to you. This is how the Atlanteans learned how to do what they did. They had long lifespans, so they had a long period of time. It's the prior yuga, the Treta Yuga. The average lifespan in the Treta Yuga was 1,000 years. Methuselah. So go into the garden and let something seep into our thick coconut of a brain. Because if given enough time and purity of awareness and patience and a karma for this sort of thing, the devatas will speak, in a sense, by way of inspiration. Obviously, you don't hear voices. No, you have to go to a shrink for that. But it is possible to become inspired and think new thoughts. And I don't have to go into nature, actually. All I have to do is go feed my alcoholic friend and make sure he doesn't starve. And while I'm driving, something comes to me. It could be anything. You could be doing the dishes, But whenever it's appropriate, right? Whatever. I'm not saying anything useful. I better shut up at this point.